3 green, no red, landing gear, down and locked.
Hi, my name's Mark, and I'm here today to talk to you about Crosswind Landings. You know, March is coming up, and you've always heard March winds. Well, apparently they've made their way to Lufkin a little early this year in February, so it's a great time for you to get out and practice your crosswind landings. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things involved with that: a crab, a slip, and the use of your flaps. But before we get too deep into this subject, be sure to know your personal limitations and those of your aircraft. Consult your POH and know the crosswind components and those limitations involved in your aircraft. So let's talk about our airport. We're going to be using runway 16 and 34 today, and you'll notice where the wind's coming from. And normally when we would set up, we'd find our landmarks out here on the trees or whatever you would use. We've got a water tower that I oftentimes use on 16, and you would get in your downwind, turn base, turn final back in on a typical landing. However, with the wind coming in off your right wing on the downwind, you would need to set up a bit of a crab or wings off into the wind in order that you wouldn't get pushed into the runway. So in this case, we're going to crab out into the wind, make our way down the downwind, and as you begin to turn your base, you're going to need to make sure to keep your eye on the runway, because you're going to get pushed a little faster with that tailwind coming in on your aircraft, and turn a little shallower as you come back into final. So let's talk about those things. As we're set up in our downwind, you're going to need to keep in some right rudder to keep crabbed, and that's going to be dependent upon how strong that wind is coming in off your right wing. And as we make our way coming back down into our base, obviously we're not going to need that crab component loaded in anymore, but that shallow bank coming in to 16 and then turning out a little bit early as we come in on final. So let's take a look at that on our horizontal runway here. So we've come in, we're on our downwind, we've crabbed out because we have the wind coming in off of our right wing. We're turning a little shallower in here coming in on our base, and when we get lined up for final, here again there's two different ways to make this landing. We'll talk about the first, crabbing into the wind. As we come down, you'll notice that the longitudinal axis of your aircraft is not lined up with the runway. So you're literally, as you're flying, instead of being lined up with the runway, you're flying right shoulder facing your runway there. So you're coming down on your glide slope, and as you get down near your ground effect here, you're going to want to roll out that crab, wing down, so in a side slip, so that now we've got our ailerons turned into the wind. We've kept enough rudder in there that we don't begin to turn off to the left, so we're offsetting that left bank. Rolling into our flare then, touching down the upwind wheel first, then the downwind, and finally the nose wheel, wanting to make sure to keep your ailerons rolled into the wind so that you don't sideload your aircraft. Now let's talk about the second method. Again, we would be crabbed in our downwind, turning that shallow bank, coming into our base, finally into final, and rather than crabbing this time, we're going to do a side slip so that you keep your ailerons rolled into the wind, again keeping your right rudder pushed in to compensate so that we don't make this into a turn. We're coming down. Now our longitudinal axis, you'll notice, is lined up with the runway. We're keeping that upwind wing low so that when we come down, when we flare, touching down the upwind wheel first, then the downwind, and finally the nose wheel, keeping that aileron rolled into the wind so that we don't side load those wheels as we go rolling out. And the last thing we want to talk about is flaps. Again, depending upon the wind strength, you may not want to use flaps at all when you're coming in for this landing, because in many cases that's just going to create more lift for you and keep you out of control or have less control on your landing. So in wrapping up on our crosswinds, make use of your crabs, your slips, and on flaps, you may not want to use them at all depending on the velocity of your crosswind. So get out this month and practice your crosswind landings.
3 green, no red, landing gear, down and locked.